So we are on the borderline between Tazria Matzor and NACHLAOT, and I will try to talk about NACHLAOT and to see how it relates to where we are and how we can learn from there things that will help us and upgrade our Jewish life. Parsha Acharei-Kedoshim, if you take a Chumash, you will find that there are exactly 3 chapters over there. I mean, I admit the division of chapters in the Torah and in the Tanakh, except for 2 of the Sfarim, Tehillim and Megillah Seicha, the actual chapter division is not originally Jewish.
Catholic.
The Christians did so in the 13th century when they translated the Bible. They did it, and yet many sources, including the Chazon Ish, quote Perek and Pasuk, knowing that it wasn't originally Jewish, and I'll tell you why. Let's put it this way, it's practical. If I say to you, open up Sefer Shmos and find Vayosh Hashem es Bnei Yisrael, and then you get to Oz Yashir. So if you say it's in Parshas B'Shalach, it's true, but there's 116 psukim in B'Shalach, and if you don't happen to know it quite well, you may take you a while to find. But if you tell a person, open Shmos, Perek Yadalet, Pasuk 31, you get immediately to Vayosh Hashem Bayom es Bnei Yisrael Miyam Mitzrayim. Doesn't take any extra time. So to make things easier to follow today, what you call user-friendly, it's easy to say Acharei starts in Vayikra chapter 16, that ends at the end of chapter 18, and this Shabbos we read 2 parshas like we did yesterday also, and Kedoshim takes up 19 and 20, and Parshas Emor, which will be a week after, starts from 21 and goes on through 24. By the way, a parsha doesn't always end at the end of a perek. It happens to be that in Vayikra usually it is that, which makes it easier, but it's not automatically the case. There are parshios that end up in the middle of a perek. In Vayikra, most of the parshios end at the end of a perek. But the reason I'm mentioning it over here is because in Acharei, the 3 prakim that are in the first of the 2 parshas to read next week, each one of the prakim has a very clear topic which is in its center. The first parak of Acharei, which we started reading yesterday in Mincha yesterday, is about the activity of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. When we go to Shul on Yom Kippur, Shabbos morning, we read about the actions and the work of the Kohen Gadol in the temple on Yom Kippur. The whole parak there describes what the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, was doing on Yom Kippur in the Mikdash. That's the subject matter. Here, let's join us, the first parak of Acharei. The third parak, the last of the 3, that's parak Yudches, 18, talks about the laws of incest. And we read that on Yom Kippur also, although not in the morning. In Mincha of Yom Kippur, we read that. So if you ask me what's the laning about on Yom Kippur, we read Acharei in the morning and in the afternoon, the first part in the morning, the third and last part in the afternoon, and there's one parak that we don't read, and that's the intermediate parak, parak Yud Zayin. Okay, and what are the subject matters of Perek Yud Zayin? There's 2 major themes there. One, not to bring korbanos outside of the confines of the temple or the courtyard, what's known as the Azara. And the other thing, which is definitely related to the same topic, is also not to drink or eat blood. These are mentioned there as well. But the question, I think, with all due respect, is, when you read in the first portion about the Kohen Gadol's work on Yom Kippur, you're talking about the holiest Jew in the holiest venue at the holiest time. As one of the great Lubavitch scholars, Rabbi Steinsaltz, would say, that's like putting on electricity on the highest level in a place where electrocution is very possible. So you're taking the holiest Jew on the holiest day of the year in the holiest venue. You have to be extremely, extremely careful in what you are doing. I understand. The last chapter of Acharei is talking about incest. So if you're forbidden to be with your sister, where you naturally have a means of friendship and you've been together since you have been born, how much more so with your mother-in-law and your mother and with other examples. And I think in almost all cultures of the world today, I would hope, and certainly in most of the, I would say, cultural places that I'm familiar with, civilized places, incest is a universal idea of being forbidden. So, just like Yom Kippur for us Jews is a very, very serious day and venue, and the holiest Jews being involved, the laws of incest, which are universally well received, is also a very serious transgression. But in the middle, between these two peaks, we talk about something that apparently, if you look at the overall this portion, probably is very serious, but one may think, at least in the beginning, is it on the same level? When we're coming to bring a korban, don't bring it in Beit Shemesh, don't bring it in Beitar, don't bring it in Kiryat Sefer, don't even bring it in Rechavia. Only in the old city, in the Azar of Jerusalem. And if you do, the punishment you get is as severe as eating on Yom Kippur. That's serious. Kares you get for eating on Yom Kippur. You also get kares for slaughtering a korban in the wrong venue. And drinking blood, much the same, although many people would be disgusted of doing that. But you know what? You take that as an oy, which I understand. Well, when you eat liver, are you always sure that there's no blood over there when you're eating it? You don't know, and if there is, you don't feel it, naturally. Go for it.
I heard that one is allowed to drink blood from a living person.
I don't know that. What I know is
Rabbi Shmuel Herschler
that it's less than in this. It's not a doraisa, but still rabbinically forbidden.
not from a Jewish living person.
I'm not too sure about that one. But what is true is, for sure, is that if, for example, a person didn't brush his teeth properly and there's blood in his molars and he drinks from that, that's not a problem. But if it's already out, I don't know, you have to ask Rabbi Shmuel. When people quote other rabbis, I have a lot of respect, but I always have to find out in what context that they were referring to, and I'll tell you why. I have no doubts that you weren't purposely misquoting. But I have heard people quote me on things that I may have said or not said, and I like to hear from where they get it from, because as a result, I've been careful in the course of the years that when I say something which is a little bit extraordinary, I try to make sure that people understand in what specific context I'm saying this, so I won't be taken. I'm sure your intentions are noble. So, but the question coming back is, all right, I understand that one should not slaughter a korban in Rechavia or in Katamon, only in the old city. But why is it put on the same level as eating or doing work on Yom Kippur or having relations with a sister? That's the common denominator of the whole Parsha. I already saved you an extra question. What is the common denominator of all three chapters? And the answer is one Hebrew word with three letters, karet. Karet is a punishment which basically exploits you almost entirely from the Jewish community, which means the sin involved is so serious that a person who does such a thing is basically distancing himself entirely from the confines of the community. So before going anywhere further, this shoots us back to the laning of yesterday. We had two portions that we had read yesterday pertaining to leprosy. And that leprosy that occurs is because we don't use our power of speech for the right purposes. We say things about other people which cause often discomfort between them and others because of what was said. And because we're creating a split within the community, we are to be separated and distanced from the community until we improve and go back and start to speak in a way that doesn't distance people. So, one would naturally think that if a person were to try to function as a Kohen Gadol in Yom Kippur when he's not the Kohen Gadol, he's doing a defilement of the temple activity. A person who definitely comes close to a woman that he's forbidden to, he's defiling the sanctity of marriage life. And we're going to have to say that a person who brings a sacrifice in the wrong venue, not only even if he doesn't do it in any way at the expense of a Kohen, his actual bringing of the sacrifice in the wrong venue is a serious defilement as well. And that's something that we have to understand a little bit further. Why is that a real serious issue? Sorry, what did you want to say?
Oh, that correct. You said it's distancing. Isn't it being totally cut off now?
Well, spiritually, a person's being cut off, but I do believe that in the context of tshuva, anybody who does repentance has a potential of having some type of a reconciliation that could help. I mean, Yom Kippur is a day of atonement by definition. And there's even a discussion in the Gemara, what would happen if a person, chas v'shalom, ate on Yom Kippur and did tshuva on Yom Kippur itself? Would he be partially pardoned for what he had done already? Because the whole day has the concept of tshuva.
Okay. It depends what part of the Yom Kippur. Maybe
if he ate in the Elul, you're saying it would be enough time to do tshuva.
Yeah,
And if he had an hour and a half after Kol Nidre, still plenty of time till Yom Kippur is over.
He can eat on Yom Kippur if he's ill, sick,
Then you're expected to. Then it's a mitzvah to eat. If you're supposed to, just like you are forbidden to eat in certain cases, you are commanded to eat when it's for health reasons. The same Torah is said to fast, and sometimes tells us, well, in this case, we act in a different way. Okay. So I think what is being taught over here is something very fundamental. We have two elements of ourselves as being Jewish. We have the individual dimension of being a Yid, and there's also a second dimension, which is how does a Jew operate in the community called the Jewish people. There's a difference between how I act only privately and when I have a communal responsibility as well. So, a Kohen Gadol who's working in the Beis HaMikdash anytime, how much more so on Yom Kippur, is responsible in his behavior for the well-being of all Jews. And anybody who wants to take over what the Kohen Gadol is expected to do is trying to get involved in an activity that's not befitting for him. It's not an accident that this person was appointed to be a Kohen Gadol. HaKadosh Baruch Hu had blessed him and assigned him for this task. And when people get involved in tasks that don't belong to them, what often happens is not only that specific task is not done properly, they actually lose out on other things they already were doing. There's a famous example of this in the Tanakh of a king who was a relatively righteous king till a latter part of his life. His name was Uziyahu, the king of Yehuda, and he was a very successful warrior and agricultural man, and relatively speaking as a king was pretty successful for quite a while. But then his determination was that he wanted to enter the Beis HaMikdash and to bring a frankincense, to bring a Ktoris. And the Kohen Gadol at the time, who had respect for this king, who generally speaking was noble and a good person, the Kohen Gadol speaks to him nicely and says, "Our dear king, be careful. What you're about to do now is dangerous and not for you. This is an assignment which is given to a very specific person. The Kohen Gadol is doing it is not necessarily a greater person than you. He is assigned for a certain task that befits him and doesn't befit other people. You wouldn't ask Chief Rabbi Lau or his senior father, or his father particularly, as a very good speaker. You wouldn't ask his father to go ahead and now and actually clean a tank with grease like I used to do many years ago as a soldier. There are certain things that at certain ages you are befitting to do, and certain things that are not exactly your task. There's other people who would do it better. I mean, I'm not necessarily thinking that every observant Jew has to work in motion picture, but if there are some people who are good in that and know how to use that cultural activity to do kiruv, Lubavitch correctly said, every task and type of work can be used to promote Judaism. I 100% agree with that. And the Rebbe also strongly believed that a person who does tshuva should not leave his profession, but to find in the profession that he's been involved with for many years the Jewish element over there, which is 100% true for a number of reasons. Number one, a person who's about tshuva should not all of a sudden become penniless. If he's got a profession, let him continue working at that as an observant Jew. And secondly, if he will find within his profession what is the most befitting way of doing kiruv, he would be able in that profession to pursue a lot more than I would be able to. I may have a bit of Jewish sources knowledge, but how to use that in the context of a movie star, a singer, or whatever he may be involved in, he will do it in a better way than myself. So what Cohen Gadol is saying to Uziyahu, my dear king, don't feel taken aback that I am doing this activity. I was assigned for this, and you have another assignment that's related to you. If you think about it in regular terms, the standard Cohen Gadol doesn't have too many days a year where he dominates the scene in the temple, S-C-E-N-E. And Yom Kippur, it's totally his. The rest of the year, we don't find even in halachic terms that the Cohen Gadol has to regularly be involved every day with working, except he has one meal offering that he brings every day, known as a Minchas Chavitin, which a Cohen Gadol brings. That's once a day. But there are many other hours, take in the summertime like now that we're moving into it, where you have long day hours comparatively. Yesterday sunrise, this morning is already at 6 a.m. exactly. Yesterday was 6:01. And sunset today is way beyond, is already 7:15 p.m., even beyond. So you got more than 13 hours of daylight, and that's plenty of time for the temple to function. And the Kohen Gadol only has one official shore per day to do, except on Yom Kippur, which means that the current delegation working there and the Kohanim have their task, and everybody, and I think it's a very important thing, everybody has their element which they can contribute to Am Yisrael, and give each person the credit and potential for them to do it in the correct way. One of the reasons that my Rambam writes why Maimonides, why incest is forbidden according to Jewish law, is that if a person were to be allowed to marry a sister or other siblings of close relation, then the whole Jewish people would be surrounding one family. I'm not even talking about German measles or other illnesses that may occur when you marry within the family setup. It's more than a medical issue. We want to build up the model of what's called the people of Israel, and not the Herschler family or the Levi family only. We're talking about getting us involved with other elements of the community and trying to find our way to be together. I will be honest in saying that I think one of the marvels in the post-World War II Jewish world, both here in America and maybe in certain parts of Europe, I'm saying this with certain caution, like places like France or whatever, we have a lot more marriages between different background Jewish communities, where more Oriental Jews with Ashkenazi Jews, Hasidim and non-Hasidim, and things like that, which bring a closer interaction between the whole populace. We're not looking for tribal marriage, we're looking for national marriage, and I think it's a big blessing. Until World War II, it was far less common for this to happen. I get every year shilas before Pesach in this country, and sometimes not only here, but here many times. My wife eats kitnios and we don't, because she comes from such a family, or he does, and how do you interact together? What do you do when you go to the in-laws and whatever? I'm very happy that the question comes up because it reflects that positive interaction. So the reason why the Torah, the Rambam himself writes it in the guide, and not only him, one of the reasons of forbidden incest is in order to build up positively, expand the horizons of the Jewish home.
It wasn't always like that, because when there were the 12 tribes, for several periods of time, they wouldn't intermarry.
And was it successful in your opinion?
No.
It was a disaster.
Yeah.
You read the book of Shoftim in the Tanakh. That is the only, it was over 350 years, the only official time when there was a very clear tribal differentiation. It was a very unsuccessful period.
But was this in the Torah or from their own ideas?
Well, since I was invited to give shir today, that's something which is more related to Parsha Shoftim and Sefer Devarim. But you deserve an answer. I'm not going to back away. Just saying, if I were to go into more detail, that would be the appropriate time. Maybe it's those who celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut. It could be also something relevant of it now. But I'm saying I'll say in very brief terms in relation to your question. The Netziv, the Rosh Yeshiva in Volozhin, said that the Torah, the Tanakh, doesn't give a full, detailed expression what is the proper model of leadership. In other words, when you read about the story of the monarchy, as it appears in Sefer Devarim, or when talking about the Mashiach, which is in Chabad also a very central issue of it nowadays, do we talk about a Mashiach king, or we talk about a Mashiach period? It's not necessarily the same thing. In other words, we all agree, I hope, those who have absolute faith, that we should be seeing the Geula and pray for it as soon as we can. Does it imperatively mean that we need to have a king as a monarchy, or the word king in the Bible remains a central leadership and not necessarily a monarchy system? That is something which is definitely debatable, because when you read Sefer Devarim, the impression is, Va'amarta asima alai melech. You will say that perhaps I will appoint a king. What do you mean? If it's imperative, why is that something that you choose? And part of the answer is that it's not obvious that it needs to be at all times. From the time Moshe Rabbeinu brought us to the boundary of the Holy Land and Yoshua brought us into the country, from the time of Yoshua till Shaul became the first Israeli king, 400 years went by. Now don't tell me that the laws pertaining to Truma and Shemitah and whatever were delayed 400 years. Jews started keeping those mitzvahs immediately. But a king waited for 400 years, and during Bai Sheni, during the second Beis HaMikdash, except for the Hasmonean period, which was slightly less than 80 years of political independence, most of that period we didn't have a king at all. And it doesn't mean the Jews weren't living here. Not only were we living here, the performance of mitzvos and tefillah and all that was much more common in the second Beis HaMikdash than the first. If you go through, it's a nice thing to visit when you have time. When you visit in the old city, you see how many mikvahs were made there from the time of the Second Temple. There are numerous ones there, because the Rambam also testifies that purity was a big issue at that time. People took it seriously. That's more in the second Beis HaMikdash without political independence most of the time. So there isn't a direct correlation between having statehood or a king and the observant of mitzvahs. There could be people observing without, and there could be political independence and following the ways of Hashem, but they're not automatically related. There were periods amongst the Hashmonaim that were very good, but there were periods without the Hashmonaim that were better. So it's not a straightforward answer. But what just a minute, I want to make sure we don't lose focus for a minute. As I'm saying, each one of the prakim in this parsha talks about a very important dimension. Yom Kippur about how to serve, where to bring the korbanos, what is the family structure, and each one of these three elements has to be respected properly and to give it the right diagnose when doing it. It doesn't mean that automatically everything is exactly in that way as described. In other words, we can live as a community without a king. The Jewish people have not had a Kohen Gadol for over 1900 years, and Judaism is still surviving. And it doesn't mean that we don't aspire to have a Kohen Gadol or a Beis HaMikdash today as well. Although Judaism is not conditioned on that, but if we manage to survive without it, it doesn't mean that we don't have the dream to see it happen. Till 75 years ago, most Jews also didn't think that it'd be too easy to return to Eretz Yisrael, and this was also a struggle for many years. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu enables us to do certain things, He allows certain things, and other things may take a longer time till they happen. But we have to be serving Hashem in whatever the current situation is like. We have that responsibility. What I am suggesting is that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us a better chance of doing things, we have to take an advantage and to try to do them better based on the reality that we have. For example, the fact that we have Shemitah and Truma here in Eretz Yisrael today, what we didn't have for 2,000 years, we should be proud of it and try to be part of it, because if Hashem let us be able to do something we weren't able to do for a long time, we might as well try to do that in the best way. When people serve in the army and learn how to protect other Jews, which they didn't have a chance to do for many years, there are ways to handle this as well. It's not only, and I'm the last one to dismiss, it's not only that soldiers should put on tefillin from time to time, it's also how to interact with other people maybe are less observant, how to handle Shmirat Shabbat together, how to have a Shabbos together, how to have a Seder with less observant people together naturally, not you're coming from outside, which is also good, from within inside, as a soldier together with other people who have less of a background, to try to facilitate, do something together. What did you want to say?
Now, does it mean that Messiah is more important than political leadership? Because Jews are, in a way, not capable of governing themselves peacefully.
If I knew exactly what the Messiah is going to be, how it's going to function exactly, I know what the Rambam writes, but the question is, what the Rambam writes in the 11th and 12th chapters of Hilchos Malachim, are all of those conditions need to be met at a given, specific given time, or there could be some of these things that are happening and some are less. I don't know. I would imagine that we have to appreciate and to serve Hashem, first of all, from what we have, and we have to try within that system to improve the faults that we do have that you're hinting to. The fact that we don't always manage to govern together in a positive way is something which needs to be improved and discussed, and try to figure out how to handle it in a more decent way. I don't suggest that we give up, because that's the easiest thing to do, but it's the least responsible thing to do. We know for sure already, in my opinion, I know it not from now, but for years already, that we have a certain problem in interacting when it's come to governing. But you know, when you learn how to drive, and sometimes at the beginning you're not doing a very good job, you don't give up. You try again. You try to make it work. It's easy to try to back away from things, but it's much more productive to try to improve them and to try to see what we can do to make it work better. That's the way I see it.
If one of the three chatoim we were mentioning is Bamakom Asher Ichal,
yes.
So what about Shiloh?
So the Jerusalem Talmud and Megillah and the Bavli and Zvachim and others talk about what was the standard status of Shiloh when it was existent. Was it considered a chosen venue? It is agreed by all that the Beis HaMikdash, when it was built, its level of sanctity exceeds that of Shiloh. But there are various elements of Kedusha that applied when Shiloh was in existence, and it was there for quite a few years. 369 years, the Talmud says, the Shiloh Mishkan was. I see you're a bit surprised, and I understand why you're surprised. There's a fascinating story about it in the Tanakh. I know you people a little bit less are involved in Tanakh, but since you asked me, I will respond. There was a tragic act which you heard of, I'm sure, of the concubine in Giva, where there was a man from Benjamin who assaulted a woman who was a concubine. And they made a ban against marrying the tribe of Benjamin. There also was a civil war there, which 3 rounds of battle occurred. The last time, most of the Benjaminites were killed. 900 were left, and that's where they got into this whole issue. And the question was, after most of the Benjaminite men were killed in the war, yet we didn't want to wipe out the tribe, so there was a suggestion to try to create a marriage between the unmarried Benjaminites and nice Jewish ladies who would be available. And the decision was that they would meet in the vineyard areas of Shiloh, not far away from where the sanctuary was, the Mishkan. And there is a nice, and the Dafka in Israel, one would appreciate this more than in Crown Heights, I think, because you have to be a little bit accustomed with the geography of Israel. Shoftim chapter 21, there's a description where the celebration's going to be in Shiloh. And to me, who lived not far away from there, part of my married life also, I don't find a more well-described geographical explanation of where the location is. The Navi says, you are north of Bet-El, south of Shechem, and east of Livona. I don't know how well you know the West Bank, but you can't get a more accurate description.
Isn't it called, Judah v'Shomron?
That's the overall area of Judea and Samaria. Judea is south of Jerusalem, and Shomron is north of Jerusalem. That's in very general terms, and even the word Shomron includes an area called Binyamin, which is closer to here. If one wants to go from Yerushalayim to Shechem, to Nablus, no, I did it.
It's very dangerous, no?
Seder, I think Harlem is more dangerous, personally, and I was born in Chicago. Certain parts of Chicago were more dangerous than that, even when I was a child. I never was at a White Sox game. Cubs games I were, never was at a White Sox game. My father was apprehensive of us going to that part of the city. Okay. And anybody knows Chicago well understands why. Okay, but anyhow, between Jerusalem and Shechem at 60 kilometers, about 45 miles in American terms. If you leave from Jerusalem, the northeastern neighborhood, which is farthest to the northeast, is called Pisgat Ze'ev. One of my daughters, bless her, lives there with her children. When you pass there, you have a road called the Ramallah Bypass Road. Meaning you're not going into the Arab city, you're using an alternative road which oversees the Arab villages around, but you're not passing through them. And that's part of what's called Road 60, which starts already in Beersheba and goes all the way up to Nablus. But from Jerusalem, when you take from Pisgat Ze'ev and the northeastern part of the city, you go on that road. If you drive up that road 15 miles straight, you are getting to the settlement called Ofra, which is a Frun place, one of the earliest settlements built after the Yom Kippur War. But before you get to there, there's a left turn which brings you to Bet-El, and there's a right turn which brings you towards what you would call the Adam Road, which leads you on the way to the Jordan Valley. In between them, if you drive straight, you get to the point which is called the T junction. There, if you take a left turn, you're going to Bet-El. If you carry on, you're going towards Shiloh. You stay on the same highway, drive another 13 miles. To your left is Livona. To your right, 2 miles above, is Shiloh. If you carry on straight without turning left or right, drive another 25 miles straight. Where are you? In Shechem. All this on one clear highway. So you are north of Bet-El, you are east of Livona, and you're also south of Shechem, because you got afterwards still another 15, 17 miles till you get to Shechem. Now, it's very nice that the Bible gives us a very clear geographical description where Shiloh is, but it disturbs me. You know why it disturbs me? Imagine you were to ask me here, how do I get from here to the Kotel? Now that's a little bit disturbing, because all you got to walk is a little bit more than a block and a half till the King George Agron Junction, cross down Agron all the way past the so-called U.S. consulate over there, and then you have your choice either to go through the Mamila shopping center to get to the Jaffa Gate, or go straight and meet it from the other side. But the whole distance from where this shear is taken... Sorry?
You're talking about going to Shar Shechem?
I'm talking from here. Why to go from Shar Shechem? You're next to Jaffa Gate.
If you don't go through Mamila, you're talking about the other direction.
No, if you instead, there's two. When you get to the corner side of Agron, to get a Mamila, you have to cross the street and go to the left. But if you walk straight, you'll also get to Jaffa Gate. You just have a little turn to make at the end to the left or to the right to Zion Gate. You don't have to go. You're not even close to Nablus Gate. Not in that direction. The whole walking distance of a person who's Baruch Hashem in good health from here to the Kotel is 25 minutes walking. You would hope that a person residing in Eretz Yisrael for at least 3 years, or in Yerushalayim, let alone 30 years, doesn't need such a long description how to get from here to the Kotel. Now, when these people are explaining how to get to Shiloh for the party between the Benjaminites and these young ladies in order to make matchmaking, Shiloh was already in existence as a Mishkan then for 200 years. Not since 1967, for 200 years. Why do you need to give such a thorough description of how to get there?
To be sure to get there.
No, but what does it indicate? That the people
They
didn't go
needed-
there.
they needed it.
People were not visiting there on a regular basis. That's why they didn't know. There's certain things that if you live in a certain place for a long enough time, you wouldn't have a problem finding it. Certain people would not have a problem to find the Brooklyn Bridge. If you asked me on a highway how to get to the George Washington Bridge, I wouldn't know, because I'm a Chicagoan, not a New Yorker. For 30 years I wasn't in Chicago. I took my kids there a couple of years ago when they got their U.S. citizenship. I even got off on the right bus stop in the city getting back, and I hadn't been there for over 30 years. I haven't figured out where to get off. And I was a child when I left America. I was 11 years old. This is already years ago, but more than 30 years I hadn't been in the city. I even knew where to get off. And I was a child when I left, because the city is well planned and I knew where I was going. But no, I'm saying is...
Even for the future, for us to know where it is.
Yeah, but I'm saying it's
That description of Shiloh.
That's all right. So for us, it's wonderful. This way, you're right. I'm happy to know today that where the Mishkan of Shiloh is located today is a true reflection of what the Tanakh says. For me, that's great. But it's sad for me to know that 3 millennia ago, the people living didn't know where it was, which means that most people were not visiting the area. Like he was saying, and I'm not criticizing what you said, is very natural, going to Shechem is dangerous. But you got people living in Tel Aviv and have been there since they were born and haven't been in Ofra or Bet El either. And I'm not talking because of their political ideas necessarily. Some of them have been trained or scared to be there. They don't have family over there. And therefore they don't know where it is, although between Tel Aviv and Bet El, it's an hour and 10 minutes drive, and they've been living in the country for years. And I'm sure a lot of them already have been in Saskatchewan and in Georgia, not Georgia where Atlanta is. Georgia, I mean near Russia, or in Italy. But to be in their own country...
What's wrong about Italy?
It's great. I've been there 3 times. But I'm saying a person knows where Italy is, he doesn't know how to get to you also. I don't know, if he doesn't know how to get to Ofra, that's a little bit disturbing.
But Kal Vachomer, why to make in Shiloh
No, the point is, there is a reason why Shiloh was not visited too often.
No, not visited, but why they started at the beginning.
Why did they build the Mishkan there?
Yeah.
Because...
Parsha Acharei-Kedoshim is not there.
The Gemara
This is
brings...
exactly where we started the three scenes of this parasha.
Yes and no. The Gemara, you're all asking good questions, so I'm just streaming with you. I mean, if this was a series, I'd have to cut you earlier. The Gemara in Zvachim brings, in Parsha Acharei, it says, Ki lo vatam el hamnucha vel hanachala. There's a place that's called a place of rest, and there's a place which is called a place of inheritance. So there's a machlokas there between the Chachamim and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. What is the holiest place? Was it Jerusalem or Shiloh? Now Shiloh is where the central of Ephraim's tribe was, or Yosef. And Yerushalayim we all know today because of David HaMelech. Fair enough. But if you read the Torah, Yerushalayim is not even mentioned once in the Torah, whereas Shiloh is mentioned, and mentioned in Bereshis, where Yaakov Avinu already blesses where Shiloh is. Yerushalayim is not mentioned. And of course, Yosef and his family are way back from the biblical times, and David is from the time of the prophets, and not earlier. It was a real novelty, chiddush, to make Yerushalayim the central holy place, because the Torah didn't mention it even once. It's mentioned more than 650 times in the Nevi'im and Ksuvim, but not mentioned even once in the Torah. And there was a rebel, Yeravam, from the Samaritan, who said, why are you people going to Yerushalayim? Because of David? We have more ancient Jewish areas, Beit El, we have Shiloh, we have places that are mentioned in the Torah. I want to go back to where we started from, and not the time of David HaMelech. So that change is something that, of course, was prophetic. But you know, it's like saying that Reb Chaim Oizer Grodzinski was the rabbi of Vilna. That is true. But I'm sad to say that between World War I and World War II, where he was still the chief rabbi of Vilna, that doesn't mean that the 80,000 Jews of the city all came to ask him questions. Within the Orthodox community of Vilna, those who wanted to consult with the Rav, who had a lot of authority, he was the right person to speak to. But there were a lot of socialists and a lot of secular people living in Vilna that didn't see Rabbi Chaim Oizer as their address. When a person may have had a serious kashrut question or Shabbos question, they may have referred it back to him. So the question in Jewish history is not only where there is a geographical site. The question is, what do we do with that site? Does that place become a thriving area of Judaism, or is it not? Part of the beauty of what the Rebbe had done for years is to try to make even these far-fetched places around the world a place where there is a taste of Judaism, which is great, but still I don't suggest that a person would be learning how to be a Shomer Shabbos by going to Vietnam, even to Chabad house. He may get to Chabad house in Vietnam and have a good Shabbos meal and a good Shabbos davening, which is great. But to really get committed to Torah and mitzvahs, you have to be in a place where Torah is thriving, and not only a place where you can get kosher food or even a minyan for Shabbos. You need a place where you're going to be trained and learned. It's no contradiction. It's great that they have what they have, but everybody understands that the buildup of the Torah scholarship, wherever it is, originates from a central place. So it could be in Italy, it could be in Antwerp, it could be in Crown Heights, but it also can be in Ra'anana, and it could be elsewhere as well. But it's got to be a place where Judaism does have a solid beginning. So getting back to where we were with Acharemos, the Kohen Gadol has a central place. Korbanos have to be in a central place as well. Jewish family life has to develop in building up the Jewish community. And that's one of the major things we have to know, that there are certain boundaries even in relation to this. And after we understand that, then comes the second parsha this week, Kedoshim, how to be a decent person. And a decent person, you have to be wherever you live, even if you don't have a Beis HaMikdash, even if you don't have family problems. There are certain responsibilities that we have towards each other in being good and holy people. That's already an additional dimension. And Judaism, in that respect, requires a lot more than it requires of a Gentile. You know, we have a lot of reason as Jews to feel hatred towards people that cause us a lot of trouble, but we don't find it to be a good act to go and try to kill thousands of people, even if they were bad towards us. We don't want to develop their evil behavior to be of our ways either. That's not a Jewish ethic. You wanted to say something? I'm sorry. Yeah. So I think these kind of thoughts have to be in our background, that we live in a society that doesn't necessarily like us, to put it lightly, but that doesn't mean that we should develop an ethic which is similar to them. We have to be proper and totally careful in our midos and good behavior because we are Jews. We don't want to become as animal and evil like our enemies are. And that's why we're not going to... The fact that we don't retaliate in the way they do doesn't show a weakness. It shows the strength of our ethics and what we believe in. And the fact of the matter is, other countries who are far more violent are not surviving anymore. Take your own country, okay? There's no doubt that amongst the 5 empires that were in ancient history, the Roman Empire was the most powerful one. And one of the powerful ones in the past was also Greece. Neither Greece nor Rome today are the stronger powers in Europe. Let's put it lightly. And I'm not talking about Babylon and Persia, and Iran and Iraq, which have a mess between them. In other words, the fact that there were empires in the past that were very strong in a certain area doesn't mean that they maintain their strengths at other times. Where we, Baruch Hashem, people thought that Judaism isn't there anymore. Baruch Hashem, it is alive and more than many years before.
What about Melachta B'drachai?
Okay.
Ken Nekamot.
Halachta B'drachav, the Talmud and Sota, those who learned Daf Yomi had actually seen it recently, and Lubavitch also should know it from the Omer, because a lot of the Chabadnikim learned Masechet Sota during the Omer period. Actually, it would be in what they had just learned a couple of days ago. To be merciful and kind is what we learned from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's behavior, and not necessarily to try to seek revenge for the purpose of revenge. Now, the Kel Nekamot is a divine decision, but on top of it, I put it this way. What we do in order to express self-defense against a potential attacker, we don't have to be kind with them, and if they're trying to endanger Chas v'Shalom any Jew, we will get rid of the person who's trying to cause us trouble. But after whatever occurred, to go in and initiate, to go to one of their villages and start shooting out a lot of people like the way they behave, that's not going to bring us any closer to our goals, and that's not the way of a Jewish nation to operate. On the other hand, to try to create a system, that's what Israel's dealing with all the time now. How to, not for the purpose of retaliation, but to cause the other side to be scared, to cause trouble, what would be the proper means of seeking a punishment to the other side that will teach them not to touch Jews? This is a question which needs to be dealt with. Okay, that's a serious question. When the Americans had the 9/11 attack, you didn't find that the United States went and started to destroy a whole country. It may have got involved in Afghanistan, because if they found that the roots for what occurred then originated over there, there was a hope to try to limit the trouble over there. I'm not too sure they were successful in what they tried, but here you're talking about a world power who has tremendous potential and has less of an ethical standard than Israel does, and nevertheless, they didn't necessarily work it out in a successful way. As opposed to you, who was brought up, let's say, in Italy. When I left the United States, it was the same year, 1973, when the Vietnam War officially ended with the mediation of a Jew, Kissinger.
I thought it was 75 it ended, no?
No. It ended in 73.
The same Jew who sold Israel.
Fair enough. Now, 55,000 Americans were killed in the war. That I was trained when I was a child already. But what not everybody knows, that in that war between 1954 and 73, 2 million civilians on both sides of Vietnam got killed, and they weren't part of the battlefield. There were plenty of communists on the other side and South Vietnamese besides Americans who were killed in the war, but the ones who suffered the most were the ones who were not fighting. Those were the civilians. 2 million people on both sides of the conflict were being affected. Now, if you think about it a little bit further,
Ukraine?
Yeah, I'll get to that in a minute. What you see from here is that even when you find a solution to a technical conflict, what happened over there? The Americans lost the war. The communists took over the whole country. And this started less than 10 years after World War II was over, when America was at its peak after being victorious in Europe and in Japan. It didn't help them later on. For 18 years the war went on over there, and it didn't seek its goal, and 2 million people lost their lives for something that didn't help. So what we gain out of it? Nothing. How many Russians lost their lives in World War II? Not soldiers. Almost 20 million people lost their lives. And did it solve anything on a communist level? No, it didn't. So it doesn't always work the way we would like. There is one point, though. You mentioned the Ukraine. As you remember, Kennedy was assassinated in November 1963. Now, he was killed by a person who was pro-communist. If it was Lee Harvey Oswald, let's assume it was him. There's something that some of you don't know, but I happen to know.
Johnson.
What?
Johnson.
So what about Johnson? Kennedy won the election in 1960, and he became, of course, the president by American law on January 20th, 1961. He was inaugurated, which means that was his first time. He was 46, the youngest president ever to be elected. This is what I know from my knowledge as a child. There was meant to be an election, of course, in 1964. Okay, but he was killed in 1963. So as you all know, Johnson was sworn in to be president on the plane going to Dallas, so that there would be a president present at the funeral of John F. Kennedy. So when Johnson got off the plane in Dallas on Friday, November 22nd, he was standing next to the fresh widow, Mrs. Kennedy, was about to see her husband being buried, the ex-president, because now there's a new president involved. All this is true. Had Kennedy survived and would have not been killed, and there would have been an election in 1964, he was one of the popular presidents at the time. The chances is, although the U.S. law is that way, that you can only have 2 terms of office since World War II after Roosevelt, he would have been in office till 1968. And then Nixon may have won or not won the election in 68, we don't know. Lyndon Johnson came in 63 because of assassination, and he won the election in 64, which was quite natural, and he stayed in office, already elected, till 68, and then Nixon won later. Had Kennedy survived and would not have been assassinated, he would have been the U.S. president during the Israeli Six-Day War. Now, in 1956, in the Sinai campaign, the U.S. president was Eisenhower. Not only was it Eisenhower, the war that took place was at the end of October 1956. A week after Israel took over Sinai, he was re-elected Eisenhower as President of the United States. Now, Israel, when it took over the Sinai, was in connection with the French and British, who had an agenda not to have the Suez Canal in the hands of the Egyptians. All this is true, but it was done without consultation with the United States. So Eisenhower forced Ben-Gurion to withdrawal, which he did 3 months later. But one major thing he did achieve, that for 11 years there was quiet in this country, till 1967. Now, when I was a high school student, I already lived here. And my teacher of blessed memory, a real Torah mensch, said, Bachurim, you should know that having 10 years of quiet in Eretz Yisrael is not something to underestimate. No, he was saying, even though we had to give up that because of Eisenhower's pressure, but we did have 10 years of quiet, which many people came here, in the Eichmann trial and all that happened in the meantime, etc. What I'm saying is, if Kennedy would have won the election, and he was just as anti-Israel as Eisenhower, if not more, he would have forced...
His father was a Nazi.
I don't know if Kennedy was that bad, but he was definitely not pro-Israel at the time. He would have forced easily Eshkol to give up the territories without concession. The biggest miracle in the post-Six-Day War was in November 1967 in the UN Resolution 242, which talks about withdrawal from territories, but not all territories. As a result, but you spoke about Judea and Samaria, or even the Kotel, and Kever Rachel, or Maras HaMachpelah, is a lot because Kennedy was killed. Because Kennedy would have not allowed us. You don't realize that until the Six-Day War, Israel, absolutely, Israel and America were not in good connections. When de Gaulle, from France, put an embargo against Israel during the Six-Day War, that's when, for the first time in 19 years, Israel started to get closer to the Americans. But for years, it wasn't that way. When Israel celebrates its independence this week, the U.S. were against the independence. They forcibly were against it. They tried to convince the British not to leave. Now, they weren't doing it from anti-Semitism.
Truman, yes. Roosevelt, no.
Roosevelt was worse in certain ways.
Yes.
But Truman it wasn't because of hatred towards Jews. It wasn't the main issue. They were apprehensive. They were afraid that Israel would not be able to fight against 6 states. And that sounded reasonable
To
because
fight against
6 Arab states that were about to fight. And the chances are Israel would have a big trouble getting out of it. And the remaining Jews then would have to look for a place to go to. The Americans already had their trauma from the Jews who came from Russia to America in the beginning of the 20th century. And they didn't want Israeli refugees from the Arab conflict to fly to America. They wanted Israel to survive, and they were convinced that Israel would not win. But of course, the Americans on their dollar, it says, "In God we trust." And the Jewish people, with Hashem's chesed, gave us Yerushalayim, gave us Lod, gave us the Negev, and all this was not given in 1947 in the UN resolution. In the UN resolution, which the Arabs dismissed, we didn't have Yerushalayim at all. It was an international city. We didn't have Jaffa, Lod, Beersheba. I'm not talking about Samaria. You wouldn't be able to leave Israel. There wasn't an airport, because Lod was part of the Arab plan, Ramla included. These were added in 1948 because of the battle.
1922, San Remo.
Yes.
Everything was ours.
Theoretically, but Churchill took out Transjordan, the West Bank. Now, you know what? I don't want to sound, this is a topic beyond our shir now, but Mitzvah Hashem someday I'll explain to you why even there was an Ashgacha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that it would take a process. Because if Israel would have taken over the old city from the very beginning, the whole Muslim world would be fighting against us day in and day out. Look what's happening even now. I mean, in the beginning they may have been shocked, but there are today 1.6 billion Muslims around the world. And Al-Aqsa, all this nonsense they talk about, is something that they make a big issue out of. And the countries in the Islamic world are becoming more fundamentalistic.
Indonesia.
So, right, you can imagine what would have happened if 2 or 3 mosques would have fallen during the course of the war. And it didn't happen, Baruch Hashem. But just imagine in the 6-day war itself, if any of the mosques of the old city would have fallen during the course of the battle itself. What this would have done towards us, I don't want to think about. Kadosh Baruch Hu has his own way of handling it. Anyhow, thank you for having me and listening for a whole hour.